Welcome to Dark Dreams.
The moon is full and it is dripping with blood.
Now comes Blood Moon Rising magazine.
Original fiction,
Creature features,
nightmarish artwork.
interviews, and other original horror.
Visit bloodmoonrisingmagazine.com and join our rising legion.
El Tío by E.S. WYNN. The man they found chained to the ring was not a man at all. He was something different, something more, a shade of teeth and hissing whispers bound to a ring of glassy alloys at the bottom of an improbable tomb still crusted with the pyroclastic ashes of a young earth. The glyphs carved into the strange onyx walls of his sepulchre were alien symbols. To the men who witnessed them, photographed them, pored over them, they escaped every attempt to understand them, to read them, persisted as parts of a scrawling, incomprehensible testament, left by the speakers of some long-dead language. The man they found in the tomb refused to read the words, refused to speak of them or translate them into any known language, only grinned when asked, prodded or demanded to. With monstrous ease he picked up the languages of the men as they argued in his tomb, spoke to each of them in a hissing accent that betrayed his inhuman ancestry, butchered the British English and Bolivian Spanish he absorbed so fluidly, so effortlessly. They had done him a great service, he told them. They had done him a great service, and he was eager to reward them. The Bolivian workers crossed themselves at his words, took his angular features and dead pale skin as signs that the man was something unholy, something of the devil. It was the white men, the men of learning, curiosity, and greed, that saw him as a resource, a thing to be exploited, a source of many rewards from a forgotten, powerful past. Among those men of culture and learning, he was referred to simply as the Ring Man. But among the Bolivian workers who heard of him, saw him, worked close enough to be touched by him, he became El Tío, a cold and terrifying vision of Lucifer incarnate. From the moment El Tío spoke, greed drove the expedition with all the cruelty of a master's whip. Greed drove men to hurriedly copy down the tomb's glyphs for later study, to break apart chunks of wall and desecrate that impossibly ancient place until it became an empty, shallow ruin. It was greed that led the men to break loose El Tío's chains, just as it was greed that led them to clothe him in donated suits, pieces of modern finery from carefully maintained traveling wardrobes that made him look more like a man, less like a beast. It was greed that hurried the expedition home, and it was greed that carried El Tío into the depths of a place that would become Lab 731, just as it was greed that kept him tethered there. Like a deceptive wolf, El Tío played the loyal dog, flashed sharp-fanged smiles as the seeds of knowledge he gave under the guise of rewards took root in the white men's minds, blossomed and grew in mighty, terrifying new directions. Like a mouth possessed of a great, singular, universal mind, El Tío whispered secrets to the men of Lab 731, secrets of the true inner workings of things, the ways in which the minds of those who stir between the worlds bleed into the physical, manifest in skin, in sensation, in darkness. He whispered the secrets of machines that behave like living matter, the secrets of a human symbiosis with living strains of bioalloy. He filled eager, inquisitive minds with the secrets of building living cells, of building creatures from simple elements, and opening them in ways that gave them life, imbued them with the ability to capture spirits and wandering soul material. Like a cunning dog he paced among them, breathed illness into their waiting ears, their supple minds, took on their mannerisms, their dress and their appearance, until he was a sick parody of a man, the inspiration behind every decision, every new direction that Lab 731 chose to follow. The administrator, once a strong, vital man, soon became little more than a paper-thin puppet, a broken, selfish-eyed waif, leaning over canes and stumbling wherever he dared to totter. And as he aged, the subtle hand of El Tío became steadily more visible, more aggressive, a mighty dragon rising up behind his tools until he subsumed them, until every moment the white men spent in conquest of science was spent to serve him. Like a cancer he spread, a crawling, hungry infection, corrupting first Lab 731, and then those who had the luxury of only passing through it. Officers of military and civilian oversight, family members, human test subjects. These were his pawns, the vectors by which he spread his influence into the outer world. Through them he snapped up more converts to his cause, cemented the flow of resources that was needed to continue his strange, silent work. In return, he whispered more secrets of the universe to men greedy for patents, for riches, for control, for eternal youth, seized and possessed at any cost. Like a patient surgeon, he showed them the ways of manipulating the human mind, the means by which parts could be sliced from the brain to sever connections to the self, the soul, leaving the body a tool to be used, exploited, little more than an organic machine. Like a dark messiah, he spoke to hungry men of eldritch surgical procedures, allowing old men, rulers of the world, the financial elite, to have the soul parts of the brain transplanted into the bodies of younger men, the poor, loud-voiced artists of the world, who were better served as hosts to the souls of kings, despots, bankers, and invisible hands behind the government. Like willing servants, the men who crowded to listen to him recorded his every word, his every whisper, brought his knowledge into the world and kept it selfishly guarded among those very few closest to El Tío. Generations lived and died, centuries passed, and still El Tío's knowledge corrupted men eager to slice each other open if it meant even a handful more minutes of overindulgent life. Like dogs, he keenly, carefully pitted them against one another, watched as they threw the world into chaos, over and over again in the name of petty, insignificant struggles. Like a god he watched, laughed, and built his empire, filled the world with the roots of his cancer, made of mankind a plaything, and kept the talons of suffering sharp, an ever-present force in the flesh of a world that had once exiled him to that eldritch tomb, in aeons so long forgotten that only his mind held a faded record of it. His mind, and the glyphs of the forgotten tomb mankind had never deciphered, would never decipher.
I say every house in America should have an electric chair. And every man just once in his life should sit in it, just so that he can feel the power of millions of gallons of electricity flow through his veins. I got an electric chair, that's all I need. You get an electric chair, Sheldon, you don't have to worry about the audience. You get an electric chair, you can tell them anything you want, as long as it's real. You get yourself an electric chair and they'll sit there all night long. Kind of a funny idea, sitting in an electric chair and doing a show. Well, think of the therapeutic value of an electric chair and all the money it is. Yes, an electric chair in every home.
The Electric Chair, a show about horror. ElectricChairShow.com.
An electric chair. Wow.
We Who Are His Followers by G. Wayne Miller. A year after the wind started blowing, a year after the voices of the dead could be heard howling through the night, a year after there was only sand, nothing but sand, an endless, dry, sanctifying sand, the three of us made it to the Jersey shore. The house we found was brick, and it had been deserted by some fool who must have believed there was escape. It was a ranch house, low and long, built into the side of a hill 200 yards from the Atlantic Ocean. This was why it had survived the winds, the fact that it was sheltered by a hill and was built of brick. It had 2 stories, one a basement, the other a floor with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and a hall. It was in the basement early the 4th night that we caught Gina praying to the false one. She had lit candles and was worshipping an idol she'd fashioned out of cloth and painted with her own blood. Sarah and I didn't kill her, but we barricaded the door to the cellar and nailed it shut with 2x4s we ripped from a bedroom wall. There were no windows to the cellar, no bulkhead. It wouldn't have made any difference. By then the sand outside was 4 feet deep. That was on the leeward side. On the windward it was up to the eaves. The sand made a sound I remembered from the old days, the sound of hard-driven sleet on a pane of glass. I remembered the old days, when there was cold in winter, when there was snow, when people in a blizzard would gather round the hearth to make themselves merry. I'm not saying I missed those times. I only want you to know how the wind and the sand sounded. How, if you closed your eyes, you could imagine fluffy snow piling up outside. Christmas Eve and stockings hung by the fireplace with care. The night we barricaded Gina into the basement, Sarah touched me. I'm not sure how long exactly it had been since she had last done that. I didn't know at first what she wanted. I think she wanted intimacy. She knew intimacy had been outlawed by him. Everyone knew. Each of his true followers had been carefully instructed long before the wind and the sand had started, and still she insisted. Still she floated her hand across my cheek, lingered ticklishly at the lobe of my ear. Then she moved her hand lower, down my chest, the way she used to do. "Stop," I ordered, pushing her away. "Please, repent." "No, you must." "Please, Richard, please. Just once more, like before." Her face was in mine, mine in hers, and I could feel her breath, soft, sweet, tempting. I didn't want to have to kill her. "Pray," I commanded. "Stop it! Stop! I can't take it any more!" she yelled hysterically. I had to hit her. I struck her across the mouth, and she fell to the floor, crying. The top of her shirt accidentally opened, and I glimpsed the paleness of her breasts, smooth and white and perfectly curved. A 16-year-old's wondrous breasts that once would have made me crazy. I turned away. Something stirred in me, temptation, and I turned, but did not kill her. Could not. Instinctively I said a prayer to him. It had no immediate effect. For one long, dangerous moment I remembered. Then I drove it quickly from my mind, how it had been when we'd called ourselves lovers, then husband and wife. For the first time in a year, the wind abated that night and the sand did not punish us as hard, but we could still hear the voices of the dead. If anything, they were louder, closer, seeking relentlessly to be let in. By then, of course, we had learned that you could ignore them, that they were harmless, like toothless dogs with fearsome barks. It hadn't always been so. In the early stages, in the weeks before winds and the sand had come, the voices of the dead had been terrifying. Certain people had been driven insane hearing them. A few had killed themselves just to get them out of their heads. Eventually, we who are his followers learned the voices of the dead could be safely ignored. With concentration and practice, they would almost be forgotten. Almost. Gina howled through the first half of the night, the 4th night of our stay in that house, the 61st night since the wind and the sand had begun, the 6th year since he had come. She was louder than the voices of the dead, much louder than the subsiding wind and the still pelting sand. For the first few hours she threatened us, me in particular. She vowed that she would get me. She vowed that she would arrange for the false one to cast me down, so as to trample mercilessly upon me. Up and down, she swore, a filthy torrent of invective that was painful and ugly to hear. Then, somewhere after midnight, her tone began to change. Slowly at first, and then with a vengeance, she started shamelessly pleading, begging our forgiveness, making promises of future good behavior, asking for a second chance no matter what our price. Saying she had been only momentarily unfaithful, she offered her life again to him. Her voice had genuine fright woven into it. Sarah wanted to give her a chance. "She's your sister," she said meekly. "In all this time, through everything, she's never done anything like this before. She's scared, Richard, scared out of her mind. I'm scared too." "She can never be trusted again," I said firmly. "Remember what he said." Together, we prayed. I don't know how sincere Sarah was, but together we recited the words he had instructed us to say. The day the winds had started, 2 months ago, so many had been like Gina. So many had turned their backs completely on him, had turned toward the false one in the foolish hope that in that direction they would be saved, and the winds would stop, and the sands would retreat, and they could get back about the business of their filthy lives. Candlelight vigils were in every public building. The airwaves were jammed with entreaties, offerings, services that went on through the night. Processions filled the city streets, already covered with a growing layer of sand and debris. Many of us who remained true were initially ridiculed and later arrested, and more than one of us was put to death in gruesome spectacles that filled stadiums and malls. We were fortunate. With him showing the way, we escaped. Me, Gina, Sarah, among the first of his true believers. The wind kept coming, and with it the purifying sand, the means of our sanctification, spreading inland from both coasts, spreading toward the coasts from the Great Plains, killing trees and smothering crops, and filling reservoirs and choking the air. The migrations began then. Entire towns on the march, band after band of frenzied, doomed heathens, in search of food and water and sanity in a world that seemed to have gone mad. Gina, Sarah, and I, the 3 of us, seemed luckier than most. Of course it was not luck. The strength of our faith kept us alive. Through visions he delivered us safely to the buildings that still stood, still had canned goods and water and shelter from the wind. Sarah and I fell asleep late that night, the night we found Gina worshipping the false one. The voices of the dead did not bother us. We slept the way we always had since the wind, uneasily, with thirsty nightmares that did not end even when we had opened our eyes. It was dawn when I awoke. Sarah still slumbered. Something had happened while we'd slept. Something he had ordained. Something he had always promised to us, his true believers. The wind had stopped. The sand as well. For the first time in 2 months, you could see further than 25 feet. You could breathe, and not cough or choke. You could see the ocean, grayish clouds hovering over it like a fog. You could see wreckage of another house the wind had devoured, and the mangled top of a swing set, and the partially buried hulk of a windowless old car. And if you dug down a bit, I'm sure you could have seen the mummified bodies of those who had doubted. Mostly, you could see one great landscape of white, like a Vermont village after snow. There were no more voices of the dead. He came to me in a vision then, in the first moment of that strange new quiet, while Sarah slumbered on. He was greatly displeased. He informed me in the gravest tones. I had sinned by allowing Sarah to arouse me, although that was not the word he used. Wrong not to have sacrificed her after what she'd done, after she herself had sinned so mortally, permitting those thoughts to enter her head. I should be chastened, he said, punished with a punishment that would rival the fires of hell. But he would give me a chance to atone. He wanted me to understand that was the kind of God he was, forgiving and merciful. Sarah was still sleeping when he left me to my penance. In the kitchen I found a knife with a wooden handle and a rusty blade a foot long. I came back to her, knelt by her, softly rolled up the sleeve of her right arm, the arm to the hand that had touched me. Mustering my strength, I started to sever that hand at the wrist. She awoke instantly, of course, screaming, and I had to sit on her to stop her wriggling. Against the backdrop of her milky smooth skin, her blood was a magnificent red, with a faint odor of copper. When I was done, I cauterized the wound with a kerosene lantern. By then, of course, Sarah had passed out. I sat on the living room couch, watching to be sure the bleeding didn't start again, and smoking one of the cello-wrapped cigars we'd discovered in a bedroom closet. It was still fresh. I waited until Sarah had regained consciousness, and then I led her by the good arm outside into the bright new day. She did not protest, and I knew with time he, in his infinite goodness, would be able to welcome her back. In the basement, Gina was sobbing. I could hear her as we walked along the beach, walked south, walked toward the land he had promised us. We, who are his followers.